Good Yontiv. Over these holidays, I've been sharing my belief that the challenges we face today are not simple. They are foundational. They are at the core of society. And so we have to work on our foundations. This year I'm relying on two voices. The first is the work of author Narina Hertz. She points out the greatest fault in our foundation is our acceptance of being tragically disconnected. The second comes from our tradition from Pirkei Avot. It's written by rabbis who were responsible for helping to rebuild Jewish society after the destruction of the temple. And in one phrase, they create a blueprint for us. The world stands on three things, al shlosha devarim, on Torah, learning, on avodah, our service to something greater than ourselves, and on gimilut chasadim, random acts of kindness. On Rosh Hashanah, we touched on gimilut chasadim. Tonight, I will address the cornerstone of Torah, and tomorrow morning, avodah. One of the great Israeli Torah scholars, Yeshayahu Leibowitz, describes the great lengths that we have to reach in order to get people to study Torah. When children are young, he says, we have to offer them an incentive, offer them a piece of candy. We find that children happily learn Torah with a little bit of sugar. But when that child grows up and becomes a little more sophisticated, we too have to get more sophisticated, he says. So our bribery should be, if you study Torah, I'll buy you some nice shoes, maybe that dress you've been eyeing. But eventually, clothes and shoes won't do it either, he says. Now an adult, a teacher of Torah should offer the grown student cash. Study Torah and you can go buy whatever you want with this money. And one day, even money will not be enough. Once they're a mature adult, they will value honor and pride more than any paycheck. At this point, we should say to the student, you should learn Torah in order that you can become a judge. People will stand before you and do your bidding, and everyone will know your name. Even then, eventually, as the student matures further, the honor of their peers is no longer a good enough motivation. Tell them that they study Torah in order that the generations that will follow them will remember them long after they die. Study Torah in order that your name will be great and you'll have a great legacy. I never had the pleasure of meeting the esteemed Professor Yeshayahu Leibowitz of blessed memory when I studied in Jerusalem, but I know this. I would have loved to have been his kid. Here's the challenge that I imagine you and certainly my kids would point out. If you have to bribe me to study Torah when I'm 5, and you have to bribe me to study Torah when I'm 95, maybe studying Torah is not so valuable. For if it was, as Pirkei Avot suggests, if it's one of the pillars upon which the whole world stands, at some point wouldn't we realize it's necessary for our lives and just do it anyway? Said differently, what is it that's so painful about Torah that we have to bribe our kids to study it? What is it about Torah that's so important we have to bribe adults to stick with it? So let me assure you first, unlike Rosh Hashanah, there's no gift card under your seat. I can't give you money to go out and buy a new Torah commentary so that you can have Torah. And here's why. The true Torah is not a book. It cannot be bought. It has to be practiced. Torah is not a subject, it is a verb. It is not the law, it is learning. As Rabbi Shmuley Yanklowitz called it, it's a practice that is about the development of the self. As the great scholar Elie Wiesel described it, it's not there to make our lives unbearable, but the opposite, to give us courage to live life through the unbearable. As my professor, Isa Aaron, wrote, the Torah is about learning from others in order to find ourselves. It is not a book. It is a process. It is learning. So what makes it so important? Not God, not a story about a supernatural power, That's important, but that's not what makes the process of learning important. Torah as a verb is important because it is a sacred dialogue. It is an act of building courage in an environment that has always been filled with uncertainty. To be a student of Torah is not seeking mastery of a particular topic like we do when we go to college. It's seeking a greater understanding of ourself and perhaps life. So what makes it important is not that it's about Adam or Eve or Abraham or pharaohs. It's important because it's about our relationships, our journey, what plagues us. It is not a book of rules. It's an act of bettering ourselves. It's not about the ancient world, it's about the present, which is why it is difficult. And why, if we have to bribe you to focus on you, if we have to do whatever we can to get you to be here and now in the present, we'll pay anything, because that's how important it is. So where are we now? Of all the pages of Hertz's book, the page that struck me as most relevant for today is page 34. You should all know what that is. It's here that Hertz describes what she calls the snake effect. If you've ever taken a walk in the woods, she says, and jumped back because you saw a stick on the ground but thought it was a snake, you've experienced the snake effect. According to University of Chicago Brain Dynamics Laboratory, when we feel disconnected, when we are isolated, when we don't feel that the world sees us, we see snakes everywhere and all the time, even when they don't exist. So if I were constructing an all-hate prayer, a confession for this year, it would sound like the very last sentence of page 34, something like this. Al-hate shachatanu lefanecha, for the anger and hostility, for our propensity to perceive our environment as threatening and uncaring, for our diminished empathy, for our quick reactions. For this we are guilty, and our tragic disconnection may have led us to all of these sins. Too often this year I have seen in myself and in others this snake effect. We are quick to anger. We are too often hostile towards those we love, and perhaps those we barely know. We see threats first, even when they may not be real. We react, but we don't empathize enough. We've become guarded and defensive. Our world has become narrow, and we too often narrow-minded. In the Torah, this would be referred to as Egypt. In Hebrew, Mitzrayim, literally the narrow place. But as our Shabbat prayer book reminds us so beautifully every Friday night, wherever we go, it is eternally Egypt. And we should always know there's a better place, a promised land. This is why Pirkei Avot tells us that learning has to be one of the foundational cornerstones of our life. Because we are not meant to live in Egypt forever. But we have to do something to get out. Mark Twain once wrote about a man who spent long, hard years in prison, sitting there, waiting to be freed, until one day he got up, pushed the doors open, and realized they had never been locked. If we want out of the narrowness of our world, if we want to better ourselves, lessen our anger, diminish our frustration, begin to trust society again, sitting back and waiting for someone else to do it for us is going to take a very long time. For me, more often than not, Torah has opened the gate for me to look at the world differently. And for all of us, it's sitting here all the time, waiting for us to pick it up, to learn, to look at ourselves, and to look in the moment. I recognize that it would be arrogant of me to presume that what has worked for me, what has helped me to get up from the places when I've been stuck, will automatically work for you. But you see, I've studied Torah. It taught me also. It would also be foolish for me to believe that it absolutely won't. And so tonight I want to share with you some of the ways that Torah has opened gates for me. I share them humbly in the hopes that at least one, perhaps more, is as helpful to you as it has been for me. The gate of daily practice. Joshua chapter 1, verse 8. Let not this Torah cease from your lips, but recite it day and night. At the height of the pandemic, Carrie and I had sat on our couch so often and for so long that we had to buy a new one. I think you could tell who sat where, if you know what I mean. And it was around this time that perhaps was the last straw that also pushed us to start to live a healthier life. And so we did what most people do. We looked online. We found a 55-day challenge. Included in this challenge was a task to read 5 minutes every day. In addition to dieting, in addition to exercising, every night we had to read a piece of nonfiction. And we did. And I'll tell you, as I find the right page because they're out of order. Found it. I found that reading just a few pages, 5 minutes a night, of a piece of nonfiction, we were told it had to be something that would better our life. Not a trashy novel, not something for work, not something that would serve us selfishly, but rather would serve us wholesomely. And so I read a book, a memoir of a man, an African-American man who had been abused most of his life, who had worked in restaurants cleaning up in the middle of the night to make ends meet, and who eventually became a successful Marine. And you know what happened? Everywhere I went, his voice was right there. Every person I talked to, when they frustrated me, I wondered, are they a little bit like him? It took 5 minutes of reading something that otherwise I wouldn't have found to broaden my perspective 100%. That's Torah study. It's not a course in college that you finish. It's a daily practice. Gate 2, the road less traveled. Exodus 13. When Pharaoh let the people go, God did not lead them by way of the land of the Philistines, even though it was closer. God led the people round about by way of the wilderness. The goal of Torah is not efficiency. If you want to know how to get from Egypt to Jerusalem, do not use the book of Exodus as your GPS. Educator Edward de Bono describes two models for how we approach problems in our world. The first he calls vertical thinking. When thinking vertically, we follow the pattern of success. It's methodical. It is predictable, and it will get us to our answer or our destination faster than any other path. De Bono admits this is necessary and useful, but there's a lesser used style of thinking. He calls it thinking laterally. I call it thinking Jewishly. Vertical thinking is about rightness, lateral about richness. Vertically values narrowing our choices so that we know what is the absolute best. But thinking laterally, it puts more choices before us. It broadens them. It says there must be more answers out there. When we think vertically, we look for the best solution and then we stop looking. We think laterally, we look for as many alternatives as possible, and the looking never stops. The rabbis tell a story of a woman who approached a blind man, and she said with compassion, "I can't imagine what life is like for you. Being blind must color everything you do." "It does," he replied, "but thankfully, I get to choose the color." Like a game of Jeopardy, Jewish learning forces us to think about the question more than the answer, and perhaps we're asking the wrong question. It challenges our assumptions. It is what author Brené Brown calls an act of intellectual humility. People who are able to consider information, she says, that doesn't fit their current thinking, they can hold strong views, but they are also open to hearing other points of view. They are curious and willing to adjust their beliefs when faced with new or conflicting information. I don't need to tell you or anyone today that our families, our community, our world is in drastic need of intellectual humility. Perhaps now as much as any time we can remember. To be able to hold our strong views, but be open to hearing others. To be curious and willing to adjust. To change our beliefs when we get conflicting information. To learn Torah humbles us in this way. And in doing so, it helps us see the world differently. It helps us see that a blind man may see things better than we do, that a snake may actually just be a stick, that there's a way to a promised land that we may not have considered. The third gate. Torah never happens alone. Lo tov chayot ha'adam levado. It is not good for a person to be alone. E'esel lo ezer kenegdo. So I will make for you a helper who is your opposite. Words from Genesis. The traditional Torah study follows the practice of learning in what is called chevruta, or partners. I often refer to it as two people, one book. It reminds us that people are twice as valuable in our learning than the pages of any text. Elie Wiesel shares a story from the Holocaust that when someone was about to give up on life, they would remind that person that the reason to keep on going when the world feels hopeless is that each of us has something unique to give the world. Whatever that unique teaching is, it can't be taught by anybody else, and so you have to hang around. Once, he remembers, there was a prisoner who had a series of books that he wanted to publish, so they encouraged him to keep working on it. Another had a daughter he had been separated from. He wanted to talk to her about life, teach her what it was like to grow up. So they helped him imagine what this would be like to be reunited with her. In studying Torah, no one is an expert. All of us are teachers and all of us are students. It's intended to be studied ezer kenegdo, in partnership, not because we cannot handle it alone, not because it is a book that perhaps we have a hard time reading. It is also two people learning from each other's unique experience. It's a verb, it's a dialogue. It requires another person, and so do we in our lives. A spouse, a friend, a study partner, a colleague, a coworker. We are intended to learn together. And so looking at the world in isolation, when we have been separated from those people who challenge us and humble us and teach us and learn from us, we jump back so quickly. We don't see teachers in front of us, we see threats. We should look at the world as if in chevruta more often. There are partners out there for us who can show us something we don't understand. And we should realize that we are that partner for someone else as well. I'd be remiss if I did not mention that we study Torah here every Shabbat morning at 9 a.m., in person and on Zoom. Those who've attended know that we are a diverse group from our community in age and race and gender and education. There is no one teacher. All of us learn from each other, and there's no predicting where our conversation will go. It's an hour that punctuates my week, and everyone is always welcome to join at any time. But that may not be your Torah study. Your Torah study may be found in regular learning somewhere else. Maybe you have a hobby that challenges you to think differently about the world, that serves as a metaphor for how we interact with others. That's Torah study too, if you ask me. Perhaps there's someone who's a great study partner for you. Perhaps you meet for coffee. Perhaps you set goals for yourselves, challenge each other, question each other, learn each other's weaknesses and each other's strengths. You become students and teachers together. That can be Torah study too. It can't be anything. Don't tell someone, especially someone you live with, that I said watching Grey's Anatomy or the Browns game is required by Torah. But it doesn't have to be limited to the 5 books that we cherish as a people either. We've been given this gift and this mission of learning. We've been told to practice it daily, not for the sake of making money or pleasing God, but for our sake. We've been told not to seek a single solution, but to remain open to many, and we've been told not to do it alone. That's Torah study. Any one of us can do it. We shouldn't have to be paid to do it. We should do it because it sets us free. In a world that continues to be tragically disconnected, we have to work diligently, seeking new solutions with people who are our partners, people who are our opposites. Al Shlosha Devarim, Ha'olam Omed, Al HaTorah, may our Torah bring us closer to one another. May it rightfully return as a cornerstone in the foundation of our world, so that we can be the people who humbly help to heal it. Amen.